If this is your first time purchasing a home or you're new to Michigan and you're just trying to find out what coverages you need to carry for your home insurance, I'm going to go over the 10 to 13 different endorsements that don't typically get added onto a policy. If you're either new to the area or you're just started shopping and you want to know more about that, let's dive right in. The biggest thing that you've got to be careful with is sometimes the realtor or the mortgage broker will refer you over to an agent. Usually a good thing because it's people that they've worked with in the past. The downfall is most agents, at least from my experience, tend to focus mostly on the price aspect, which is important. We want to make sure we get it below the national average, which is about $1,300. And if we can get you below that in the $800, $900 range, we're happy, right? You've got a good price on the home, the mortgage guy gets you a good point on your interest rate, and the realtor gets to sell a house. That's the perfect scenario. But if you look very closely, the thing that I've found the most is when you find that you do have that really good deal or that really inexpensive policy, a $300 difference between something that's just basic can increase that policy to covering most of the situations that we're going to talk about today. By the way, if you are looking for home insurance, I'll put a link in the description below. We also work with a lot of really good realtors and a lot of really good mortgage brokers, so we can always refer you over to someone that is knowledgeable in this area. The number one endorsement that a lot of people don't realize isn't covered on a policy is water backup. Water is technically covered on a home policy for some situations. If a pipe burst and it's a sudden and incidental occurrence to where it wasn't like a dripping pipe, that typically would be covered on a home policy because that's the dwelling, the coverage A. I'll link a video at the end that goes more in depth on that part of it. But the water backup is water comes back up, so a sink overflows. If you've ever seen a toilet that bubbles every once in a while, that usually means there's some sort of gap or a hole in one of the lines that air is popping in and bubbling out. That can cause a water backup issue. And we've seen it time and time again where maybe the tub overflows. Whatever the case is, if water backs up into the home, it can cost $10 to $15 to even $20,000+ to repair. You've got to replace the drywall, you've got to dry out the carpet, all your materials. So that water backup coverage, commonly, you should have at least $10,000 water backup. It typically carries the same deductible as your house, so the most common deductible is $1,000, and most of the time that water backup will carry that same deductible. For those that have a little bit more elaborate house or you have extra stories, you may be a little bit more concerned because if that top floor has a bathroom, water backs up there, it now comes down 2-3 levels, you've got more of an issue and that cost to repair is a lot more expensive. So in that case, you may want to go a little bit higher in that cost. Keep in mind, we do understand water backup tends to be the more expensive add-on of all of these endorsements. The reason being is that that's the most common issue that you have with your home. The second one is wind and hail. Now it's technically not an endorsement because now in new policies they actually come with wind and hail deductibles. So if a shingle gets knocked off your roof from a windstorm or hail damages the house, punctures a hole, it starts getting water inside, that is normally a covered coverage in most cases. This does technically count for like hurricanes and tornadoes, but in Michigan it's very few and far between that you're ever going to see that scenario. Most commonly, we will get a heavy windstorm or a rainstorm where you've got that horizontal rain, and what will happen is a shingle will knock off. The horizontal rain isn't typically covered for it coming into like a window because that's more of a flood type of policy. In that scenario, if the shingles got knocked off and water started coming in the house, that claim is typically your standard deductible. Here's where you've got to be a little bit careful. Some agents, to get the price down for new home buyers, that's the first thing that they look at. They raise the deductible on the wind and hail where it's a 2% or a 5%. Imagine you have a $400,000 house, 5% is $20,000. If you're like me, I don't want to pay $20,000 for a claim that I thought was covered correctly. So when you look at your policy, you'll have those two deductibles to look at. You've got your all perils deductible and then a wind and hail deductible. If you see that the wind and hail is blank or not there, then usually that means that it follows the all perils deductible. Check with your agent to verify, but that's a very common way for agents to get that price down. The third is kind of a combo, so there's the hail part, but there's mold. And mold isn't normally even an endorsement with most companies. So you have to find more of a specific company that will cover that scenario. Yes, there are coverages for the water backup, but then added onto that water backup, you can add an additional mold coverage. Let's say behind your fridge there's an ice maker and that line was leaking and dripping, or you had a shower that had a crack that you didn't realize was in one of the tiles. The water's seeping, it's called seepage, and that seepage causes mold. In most cases, it's not covered unless endorsed because it's not a sudden and incidental event. If you haven't noticed it, paid attention, you're not cleaning, seeing these types of maintenance issues, then you're not noticing that the water's leaking through. It might be months before you start seeing it in the ceiling to where the discoloring notifies you that there is something else happening. That's where if you are a new home buyer, having a really good inspector, which we can recommend one as well, but we have inspectors that actually check for those scenarios. They run water in the tub and they run water in the showers, and then they have a meter that actually shows, is that hot water leaking out to other places of the home? Definitely something to look at when you're purchasing a new home. That's also a really good endorsement for those that are worried that that might be an issue. The fourth / we're kind of skipped one, so the fifth one is watercraft, and this is kind of an endorsement. Yes, if you have a boat or any type of a watercraft, a sea-doo, a boat, whatever the case is, you can endorse that on your home policy. That is an option, but most people don't typically do that. There's a couple of reasons you would and wouldn't want to endorse that. The first reason you would want is if the boat was just going to sit there. If you're going to have it in the yard or have it in a garage and you're not going to use it, that's great. Put it on the home policy. It's very inexpensive to add that to your home. When that watercraft is in the water, you want to actually have actual coverage for that specifically. Yes, your liability is covered on the home policy for if something happens. If a friend came over and you're showing them the boat and they fell over and hit their head on the concrete, whatever the case was, that's actually common. If that happens, then you've got the coverage for that. But it doesn't necessarily cover over into actually using it in the water. Let's say you did have an accident that you were liable for and now oil's leaking out. Who's going to pay for that cleanup? That's not part of that endorsement on the home policy, which is why most people choose to have their own separate boat policy. Also very inexpensive, actually, not much more than adding it to the home, so even adding it to its own policy makes sense in most cases. The sixth one isn't technically an endorsement either, which is having separate structures. The house commonly comes with 10% other structure coverage. If you have a gazebo, a shed, a fence, or if you add a pole barn or anything like that, you normally have 10% with most carriers. There's a few out there that do 2% as default, but honestly, you shouldn't be doing that unless you have nothing else in the yard but the house. Those endorsements allow you to go above and beyond what that is. Let's say you do have a $100,000 pole barn and they don't let you go above that limit. In this case, you can endorse an additional coverage, typically approved by an underwriter, but allows you to add on those additional costs just in case that other structure on your property were to have an incident. This also fits for homes that have kind of mother-in-law suites that are separate from the house. Those are just additional structures. Because they don't have their own address or parcel, then they're commonly considered additional structures on the property. You can add in that they have a sink, a shower, and a bathroom and all that. It's a little more work to actually have that put together as far as getting that insured, but it's definitely possible if you have the right agent that has the right company mix that will allow you to have that as an endorsement. The sixth endorsement is to have replacement cost on your personal property. So what that means is when you buy a house policy, you have a coverage, whether it's $100,000 to $400,000 coverage, they're going to give a ton for your personal property. That's your shoes, your couch, your TV, anything that you own. The part that a lot of new home buyers don't realize is that it normally comes with a depreciation. Just like your car. If you had car insurance, the car depreciates over time. Same thing with your couch and your shoes and everything that you own. The endorsement is that replacement cost. Instead of having it depreciate, it holds whatever the value to replace that item is. A really good example is you bought a couch 10 years ago, and it might have been a $2,000 couch. It's probably worth $400 at a garage sale. It's in good condition, whatever the case is. If you have standard coverage, you're going to get the $400 back for the couch. It's depreciated value. If you have replacement cost, they're going to give you the $3,000 because that same couch in today's market is a lot more expensive to purchase. That essentially goes for all of your belongings. And I know you're probably thinking like, gosh, this is all expensive stuff. If I have this and water backup and all of that, the right agent can actually tweak that to make it fit. There's different companies that have different risks. If your profile, as we call it, is a good risk in a certain area, then companies will give you really good rates for even adding these additional parts to your home. The seventh I think we're on is the loss of use endorsement. That actually has now become part of your home policy. So you may hear someone talk about that as an endorsement. In Michigan, it's just part of the home. Loss of use means if you can't have regular access to the home. Let's say the kitchen burnt down and they need to shut the whole home down and workers are in there and you've got to go rent a place for 4 months. Well, you've got those expenses. If it's $3,000, $3,500 to rent the next month after month after month for a similar home, similar location, you incur expenses. The thing that you don't think about is who's going to mow the lawn? I have to drive 10 miles extra to get to work. What about if I have to, for the next 3 weeks, go out to eat because the place we have, the kitchen's not ready? Those occurrences that you have that cause additional expenses, maybe the guys that are cleaning out the basement are running fans, and those fans increase your electricity by $300 a month. You don't need to out-pocket those costs because if the agent does it correctly, they're going to give you that loss of use that will protect you if you have a major claim similar to that scenario. The 8th is identity theft protection. I'll be honest, most people don't add this to their home policy. It is a good endorsement to have, especially if you want to just keep it all in one. Most credit cards and most types of cell phones now even have identity theft protection to where they'll pay for it. The common coverage if you leave the default and you put it on your home policy is $50,000. If you're not quite familiar with what that actually covers, it's very simple. It doesn't cover to pay you back for lost wages, lost income, lost credit. It's essentially assigning you somebody that's going to work with you to retain your credit or get your credit back. So if someone stole your identity, essentially we need to file and get that Social Security fixed and shut off all the creditors that they went and got new credit cards and they wrote all these fake checks and you've got to call the police department. It's a hassle. It doesn't negate the fact that you're going to be involved in either which way, but what that endorsement allows you to do is not have to pay out pocket for somebody to help you get your identity back. That's one of those coverage agents don't typically talk about, and I'm honestly one of those that doesn't necessarily add it unless it's important to you. So if you do think that that is important, let your agent know that that's something that you want to look at having on your policy. And then the 9th/10th, the last one, is the medical payments. There's a lot of videos that I'll link here in just a moment that talk about liability. And that's a huge piece. That's the biggest part of your home policy. You might think that it's covering your house. The house is also important, but the liability risk that you carry is even more important. The medical coverage, the med pay, that's not an endorsement per se again, but it's also a coverage you need to look at. Because if you have friends over, if you want to have a party, if you want to do any type of events, whether you're in the home or not, that in the home coverage isn't for you or your family, it's for other people that visit. So if that is the case, make sure that you have additional medical coverage. The default is $1,000. Most people that we work with choose $5,000. You can go above that so that if somebody got injured, they don't have to sue you. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if there's anything that I'm missing below that you guys thought was important to endorse onto your home policy. Yes, jewelry is a very popular piece. You can endorse those as well, and there's theft of guns. Some companies have limits, some don't. Those are definitely a lot of things to think of and speak with your agent. Like I said before, if you have an agent that you work with, that's great. Go to them, ask them these pieces. If you're not working with anyone or you're new and looking for a home in Michigan or just need help in general on either purchasing the insurance or just have general questions, put them in the comments below. The link's in the description if you want to work with us directly. Otherwise, the two pieces that we talked about were the liability portions. We just made a video about liability, which I'll link up here. If you're looking to get more details on the A, B, C, D, E, F, all of those coverages that come in a home policy, we also have our Michigan 101 home policy where we break down the whole policy of a homeowner's insurance. I'm Mark with Valor Insurance. We'll see you soon.